In this lesson, we're going to solve for the lengths of unknown sides using trig properties. In order to use trig properties properly, it's important to know the very formulas that go into trig. Those come from the acronym SOHCAHTOA. So I'm going to go ahead and write SOHCAHTOA at the top. Sine is equal to the length of the opposite side over the length of the hypotenuse. Cosine is equal to the length of the adjacent side divided by the length of the hypotenuse. And the tangent of an angle is equal to the length of the opposite side divided by the length of the adjacent side. Now let's do a little refresher of the steps it takes to try to solve for a particular variable. The first thing you want to do when solving for a variable is first know what variable you're solving for. So in this case, let's start off with the variable x. If I want to solve for x, I need to find where x is located, and I'm going to use that side. So I'm going to pick a side with the variable I'm solving for. Since trig is all about the ratio of sides, I also need to pick a second side. And the second side you want to pick is the one with the number. So, pick side with a number. The reason we do that is we don't want a ratio of variables. That's too much to solve for. Third step. The third step is to figure out what those sides are, meaning are they the opposite, the hypotenuse, or the adjacent sides? So I need to label the selected sides from 1 and 2. So if I'm solving for x like I am at the beginning here, I'm going to use the side with x on it, and I'm going to use the side with the number. Step 3 says I'm supposed to label those. Well, they're all from the perspective of the angle we want to use. We get to pick the angle. In this case, I'm going to pick 42 because it's already there. If I want to figure out what side 5 is, one thing to recognize is that if I were to put my finger on the 42, I simply would not be touching the 5. If I'm not touching the 5, that makes it the opposite side. So 5, I'm going to label OPP because it's the opposite side of angle 42. Then angle X, because it is next to angle 42, and because it is shorter than it is not the shortest, not at the longest side, we call angle side X the adjacent side. Those of you who are home are thinking yourself, oh, where's the hypotenuse? That is why I'm not going to label it right now, because we're not using it to solve for x. The next step is to figure out which trig function uses the two sides we selected. In this case, again, we selected the opposite side and the adjacent side. So we're looking for an A and an O. Well, you're going to find that in tangent. In fact, the tangent of an angle is equal to the opposite side length divided by the adjacent side length. So I'm going to go ahead and write this down. Tangent of 42 degrees is equal to opposite over adjacent. You got to be careful. The definition you see up here, it says it's the opposite side length of the adjacent. So you must write a 5 in the numerator, and then you write the length of the adjacent side in the denominator, which in this case is x. Now I can write anything over 1 if I want. In this case, I'm going to put tangent of 42 degrees over 1, because now I've got a proportion that I can solve using cross multiplication. So I'm going to do that next. Looking at my crosses, I'm going to take x times the tangent of 42 degrees. Keep in mind that the tangent of 42 degrees is just one number. So I'm going to write this as x times the tangent of 42 degrees equals 1 times 5, or 5 times 1, same thing. Okay, now tangent of 42, you really can't do anything with that until you convert it into the number it represents. To do that, you're going to want a calculator. So on your calculator, press the tangent button, and then type in 42 and hit enter. When you do that, you're going to get about 0.94. That is being multiplied by x, and it equals 5. Well, let's take you back to your algebra days. What do we got to do here? We want to get x by itself. So we got to do something with this 0.94. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to divide both sides of the equation by 0.94. When you do that, you get x equals 5.55, approximately. Okay. Now let's solve for y. I can go through the same steps I listed on the right. I need to pick a side with the variable. That's side y. So if I'm solving for y, that's going to be this side right here. And I also need to pick a side with a number. That's the opposite side. So I'm going to use side 5 and the side with the y to solve for y. Step 3 says I need to label all the sides. Well, we already labeled the 5. It's the opposite side of angle 42. And we need to figure out what y is. Well, y is directly across from 90 degrees. It's also the longest side. That makes it the hypotenuse. Once I've identified the two sides I'm going to use, and I've labeled them, I can use those labels to figure out which trig function to use. I need to find a trig function that uses the opposite side and the hypotenuse side. Well, that would be sine. Sine uses the opposite, sine of an angle is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse sides. So I'm going to write that down. So sine of 42 degrees is equal to, again, it's O over H. So I have to put that 5 in the top part, and then I'm going to put y in the denominator. I can write sine of 42 over 1, and now I've got a lovely proportion that's ready to be solved. So, if I do cross multiplication, I'm going to end up with y times the sine of 42 degrees. So y times the sine of 42 degrees is going to be equal to 1 times 5 again, which will end up being 5. Okay, so let's take a look at the sine of 42 degrees. We can't do anything with that until we convert it into its number. So type in sine into your calculator, then type 42, then hit enter. When you do that, you're going to get a number that's really close to 0.67. You still have your y, and on the right side, you still have 5. Much like the last problem, we need to separate y from everything else. Since this is multiplication, we want to do the opposite. We want to divide both sides by 0.67. When we do that, the 0.67 cancels, and we solved for what y is because we divide 5 by 0.67, and that gives us about 7.47. Let's do a reasonable check. So we solved for y, and it ended up being about 7.5, 7.47. I'm going to go up here and just write that in. 7.47. Remember, we solved for x, and we got 5.55. Okay, well, this makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, the hypotenuse ended up being the longest side. 42 degrees is really similar to what you get on actually both sides of this triangle. You would get 48 degrees here. So they're pretty similar, which means the opposite and the adjacent side should be almost the same length, which they are. One's 5.55, the other's 5.